Stop. Let me go, please. Late one night, while visiting my in-laws, I was suddenly dragged into a storage room by my single brother-in-law. His breathing was heavy, and when I resisted, he covered my mouth and pinned me down. Don't make a sound. Do as I say. I couldn't defy my brother-in-law, who whispered those words with such an intense expression. Then, 3 minutes later, I heard my husband's voice and that of a large group of people outside. Paralyzed with fear and unable to call for help, I prepared myself for the worst, uncertain of what would happen to me. My name is Amanda, I'm 29 years old, and I work as a nurse at a hospital in New York while living with my husband. I met my husband, John, through a matchmaking service. I've heard that I'm compatible with Virgo women. I'm so glad I met you, he said when we first met. I thought he was a bit odd at the time, but otherwise, there was nothing particularly concerning about John. He was a kind-hearted salaryman working for a well-known company, and after dating for a year, we got married. John's family home was in a remote mountain village where they ran a large-scale agricultural operation with their relatives. His family was apparently well-respected in the area, with his mother, the family matriarch, in a position to oversee the extended family. Even so, since they lived far away and my in-laws were always kind to me, I liked them. Since our marriage, we occasionally visited John's hometown together, maintaining a comfortable distance in our relationship. It was during our second year of marriage when it happened. I wasn't feeling well, so I went to the hospital for a checkup and found out I was pregnant. When I told my husband, he was overjoyed, jumping up and down. Amanda, I'm so incredibly happy, he said as he hugged me, and I was enveloped in happiness. John immediately said, "We have to tell my parents." So that weekend, I went with him to visit his family home. "Dad, Mom, Amanda's pregnant," my husband announced. My in-laws' eyes filled with joyful tears. "Congratulations, Amanda. I'm truly happy for you." Even my usually quiet father-in-law's face lit up as he said, "That's wonderful." Grateful to my in-laws, I said, "Thank you very much." "Amanda, is it true you're pregnant?" Suddenly hearing a voice from behind, I turned to see my brother-in-law, Nate, standing there in sweatpants. Nate was 6 years older than John but lived as a shut-in at the family home. With his unkempt hair and somewhat unclean appearance, he looked at me in surprise. "Yes, I'm pregnant." Suddenly being addressed by my brother-in-law, who hadn't even come to our wedding and with whom I'd never really spoken, I was flustered. Upon hearing my response, Nate's eyes widened, and he immediately returned to his room. Oh my, Nate didn't even offer congratulations. He's a recluse who's out of touch with the world, Amanda, don't mind him. That's right. He's always been odd. Just pretend he's not there. My husband and mother-in-law tried to smooth things over, but I didn't feel good about it. Ever since I married into the family, whenever I visited, Nate would stare at me with dark eyes, and I found him creepy. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say I felt disgust towards Nate. That day, we returned home after saying goodbye to my in-laws. Soon after, my morning sickness began, but John was attentive and supportive. He even came with me to prenatal checkups, rejoicing with me as we confirmed that the baby was growing healthily. My husband was so protective of me, it was almost excessive. Don't push yourself at work. It's not just your body anymore. I've talked to your workplace about giving you lighter duties, so don't worry. I was looking forward to the day I would give birth to our child. A month after our visit to the in-laws, John said, "Hey Amanda, let's go to my parents' place next week." I hesitated to respond. I still had some morning sickness and wanted to go to work, so I initially refused. However, John persisted. "There's a local festival happening. A lot of relatives will be gathering, so we need to attend as a couple. But we just visited your family recently, didn't we? This time, I really want you to come. We're definitely going, so get ready." I tried to gently refuse, but my husband was adamant. Then, I received a call from my mother-in-law. "Amanda, we don't intend to make you work in your condition. We just want you to enjoy the festival with John. Please come." After being asked by my mother-in-law like this, I couldn't refuse and agreed to visit. After a few hours' journey to my in-laws' home, my husband's parents greeted me with great joy. "I'm so glad you came. Today is the eve of the festival. Eat plenty." The table was laden with my favorite foods, and I received lavish hospitality. "Tomorrow, relatives will gather, but you don't need to do anything. Just enjoy the festival." When I looked at my husband, he was smiling kindly, and I felt relieved. Although I had been reluctant to come, I thought it was good that I did. Looking forward to tomorrow, I fell asleep in the guest room bed. How many hours had passed? As I slept, I was suddenly awakened by a strong force pulling my arm. I was dragged into the storage room opposite the guest room. When I confirmed who was pulling my arm in the darkness, a chill ran down my spine. It was my reclusive brother-in-law. Locked in the storage room, I came to my senses. "Stop! Let me go!" I shouted with all my might, but Nate covered my mouth and pinned me against the wall. Sensing a threat to my chastity, I struggled desperately, but my brother-in-law's strength was too great for me to escape. "Don't make a sound. Do as I say." With my mouth still covered, I managed to nod somehow. Then, about 3 minutes after I had been locked in, I heard the voices of my husband and many relatives outside. Although I wanted to call for help, I judged it dangerous to defy Nate and held my breath. After the presence of the crowd faded and it became quiet, Nate stared at me intently. "Just be quiet and follow me." I was made to carry a bag with my valuables, and as I followed him through the back mountain, there was a car prepared in an open area. As he got into the driver's seat, I also got into the car as instructed. "What's going on?" Then he opened his mouth and began to tell me something terrifying. Unbelievable. I trembled with fear and anger. 3 days later, I was brought back to the village by Nate, and we opened the front door of my in-laws' house. "Amanda, where have you been? I called you so many times, but you didn't answer. Don't just disappear like that." As soon as we entered, John came to the entrance and suddenly yelled at me. It might have been understandable since I hadn't been able to return his many calls that day. My in-laws looked shocked at the sight of Nate standing next to me. "You've been with Nate for the past 3 days. What's going on?" Nate and I entered the house and faced them in the living room. "Hey! Don't just stand there silent, say something. What's going on here? Why are you with Nate?" I took something out of my bag and placed it on the table. "John, please divorce me." "Huh?" My husband and in-laws stared wide-eyed at the filled-out divorce papers I had presented. "Hey, why are you suddenly talking about divorce? I've been kind to you. I've been a good husband, right?" I looked straight at John as he said this with furrowed brows. "I know everything now. You don't need to act anymore. Who did you call a sacrifice?" Actually, when Nate had pushed me into the storage room and I was holding my breath, I faintly heard a conversation. It was my husband and relatives saying, "The sacrifice has disappeared. Find her. You definitely called me a sacrifice. Furthermore, Mother, you ordered the relatives to make me sniff some chemical, tie me up, and bring me back, didn't you?" As I calmly stated this, my in-laws and John began to shift their eyes nervously. "Huh? What are you talking about? Were you dreaming?" "That's right. You're saying strange things, Amanda." At this point, I looked at them straight on. "I heard from Nate about your family's God worship. While we were escaping by car, Nate told me that his parents and relatives worshipped a god. Apparently, when the harvest was good, they would hold a festival as a blessing from the god and make offerings of the harvested crops. However, in years of poor harvest, they would make a different kind of offering to pray for a good harvest. When I asked, "What's the offering for years of poor harvest?" his face clouded over. "It's a pregnant Virgo woman. They believe that if they offer that sacrifice, there will be a good harvest." When he said this, I gasped. It was an unbelievable story, but from the unusual behavior of my husband, in-laws, and relatives, it was clear that Nate wasn't lying. This year's harvest was the worst in recent years, right? "So you were trying to sacrifice me." When I confronted them, John continued to deny it. "You've been fooled by Nate. There's no way we would do such a thing." Then the next moment, Nate took out a voice recorder and played it. "This year's poor harvest is serious. Maybe the god is angry. We need to make an offering quickly. In that case, I'll offer my wife Amanda. She's a Virgo and pregnant." As expected of John. "You're thinking well of the family. Then let's aim for the middle of the night when we bring her next time." That voice recording was of my husband, his parents, and relatives planning how to capture me. Upon hearing this, John and his parents turned visibly pale. "You were recording without permission." My husband lunged at Nate, trying to snatch the voice recorder. But Nate nimbly dodged and silently glared at John and his parents. I contacted the matchmaking service. "I heard that you were quite particular about Virgo women. You intended to make me a sacrifice from the very beginning of our marriage, didn't you?" When I pressed him, my husband finally dropped his pretense and laughed. If there hadn't been a poor harvest, I intended to stay married to you. But since it happened, it's only natural that I offer you. Do you realize what you're saying? You were even willing to sacrifice our unborn child. It's necessary for the sake of this family. There's no helping it. Where had my kind husband gone? The John before me now wore an evil smile, completely steeped in the family's traditions. God. I have no intention of becoming a victim of such a ridiculous belief. I'm divorcing you and running away. Hurry up and sign the divorce papers. When I shouted this, my mother-in-law's eyes bulged. How dare you mock our God? You worthless woman. My father-in-law and husband stood up and grabbed my arms from both sides. The offering ritual isn't over yet. We'll make you a sacrifice right now. As they held me down, my mother-in-law approached me with a cloth that seemed to be soaked in some drug. But the next moment, a voice shouted, "Don't move," and detectives burst in. My husband and in-laws, surprised by the sudden police intrusion, froze. Nate and I had told everything at the big police station in town. Today, I was escorted by the detectives. Investigations are also underway in the neighboring areas. At my words, my mother-in-law's eyes widened as she looked at Nate. You talked to the police?" "Yes, I told them everything. Including how my fiancé was made a sacrifice. What he had told me that day wasn't just about their beliefs. Apparently, during the year of poor harvest 10 years ago, his fiancée had been sacrificed by the family. At that time, Nate had tried to save her, who was carrying his child, but he was locked in the house and didn't know where to go. He cried as he told me this. It was losing his fiancée that caused Nate to become mentally ill and withdraw from society. I regretted not being able to save her. That's why, to prevent the next victim, I've been pretending to be withdrawn these past few years while watching you all. Nate had been trying to protect me from the beginning. He said that when he learned of my pregnancy, he became seriously concerned that I might be sacrificed. And his actions that day were all to help me. John, you've always been deeply steeped in this faith. When I found out she was a Virgo, I felt a chill down my spine. Damn it. You've gone and done something unnecessary. You all did it to my girlfriend too, didn't you? To think you'd even try to sacrifice Amanda, you're not human. My in-laws and husband, restrained by the police, glared at Nate and me with hateful eyes. I've finally exposed your evil deeds. May this family perish. As Nate glared back at them and raised his voice, they shouted, "Don't be ridiculous." At that moment, another police officer came running up and whispered something to the detective. Just now, multiple skeletons were discovered in what appears to be a pathway deep in the mountain you own. Can you tell us more about this? My in-laws turned pale and went limp. John glared at me with bloodshot eyes. This is all your fault. Don't think you'll get away with this. I won't forgive you for sacrificing so many lives for your absurd beliefs. Quietly submit to arrest and atone for your crimes. I threw these last words at him. Afterwards, my in-laws and husband were taken away, still shouting something. When I glanced at Nate, he was just silently crying. Later, a police investigation revealed that their family had been conducting these rituals for over 100 years. It became clear that when there were no women in the family who met the conditions, they would abduct someone from elsewhere to use as a sacrifice. One of the skeletons found was identified as Nate's missing fiancé, and my in-laws, John, and the relatives involved in that incident were all arrested together. This case was widely reported, and it's certain that the house they had protected will now fall into ruin. My in-laws and husband will live behind bars and won't be coming out for a long time. Nate, being uninvolved in the crimes, wasn't charged and will start living on his own. He spoke somewhat sadly about how he would live from now on, remembering his fiancée. As for me, my divorce from John was finalized, and I moved back to my parents' home. My child was born safely, and I'm now working hard at raising the baby with help from my parents.